ICQ Podcast episode 387, 3 mini ham radio hardware reviews. Well, hello and welcome fellow Anytone radio enthusiasts, and this is our 387th episode of the ICQ Anytone radio podcast, supported this episode by Jeffrey Wilson, VK2 Juliet Echo Foxtrot, and our monthly and subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1MRB is joined by Dan, Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, Caryn KD2 Golf Uniform Tango, Edmund Mike 0 Mike November Golf, Ed DD5 Lima Papa, Leslie Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo to discuss the latest Anytone radio news. Myself, Colin M6BRY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a collection of mini hardware reviews by Ed DD5 Lima Papa. Well, as always, it's your very kind generosity and donations that keep your ICQ podcast going, and not just the show, but also things like the website, newsletter, and the digital group, etc. And this episode, we'd like to thank Jeffrey Wilson, VK2 Juliet Echo Foxtrot. He is signed up and set up a monthly subscription plan to us, and he said thanks for the show, and he just signed up for his monthly donation, just my little bit to help keep the show running. So Jeff, thanks a lot for doing that for us, mate. We really do appreciate it, and I say it's very kind of you to do that for us. Now you can do what Jeff and our other monthly and subscription donors have done this episode, and that's think of the value you get from the show, turn it into a financial figure. Visit icqpodcast.com/donate. Either select one of the options we have pre-arranged for you, or choose one of your own and forward it our way. And as I say, everything that comes our way is greatly appreciated and keeps us doing what we do for you. Right, well, now we're going to join Martin M1MRB, Dan, Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, Caryn KD2 Golf Uniform Tango, Edmund Mike 0 Mike November Golf, Ed DD5 Lima Papa, and Leslie Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest Anytone radio news, including a 5-year deorbiting for satellites and Anytone ban. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, welcome to the ICQ podcast, episode 387, and the news roundtable for this episode. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU. Hi, Dan.
Good evening, everyone.
Yeah, great to have you. And we also have Caryn Eve Murray KD2GUT. Hi, Caryn.
How are you, Martin? Good to be here.
Yeah, good to have you, Caryn, and I will get your call sign right without multiple goes at it at some point in time in the world. Coming back to Germany, I've got Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP.
Evening, all.
Evening, Ed. Moving to the UK, Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Edmund. And we've also got our Leslie along for this one. Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G0CIB, because he's missed a couple recently. And
I know, Martin. I got dragged off to two technical things, sort out the radios for the beer festivals and the Bluebell Beer Festival. So it's small things like that. So that's what I've been doing. But very good evening to everyone.
Yeah, well, it's good to have you here to say on board.
We certainly can't blame you for going to a beer festival instead of joining us here.
I think there was a lot of sampling going on, but I can't prove it.
We've just finished our local beer festival, as you probably all know, called the Oktoberfest.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise known as a super spreader event for COVID.
Well, that too.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, we'll be at the National Hamfest in a couple of weeks' time. You know, that's probably going to be a spreader as well, but I'm still going. Anyway, that's another story. Let's start with the news stories. I like this one, and Frank sent this through. It was a press release from the FCC, and it came out within the last 48 hours of us talking about it tonight. But the FCC adopts a new 5-year rule for deorbiting satellites to address the growing risk of orbital debris. So effectively, when your satellite has done its business, you have to deorbit it within 5 years if you're in the States. Ed, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, can do. AMSAT have known about this for a while, actually. This isn't a big surprise. I think the intent was announced at least 2 years ago. And the idea, obviously, is to not have satellites still orbiting up there after they've finished their role, whatever that may be. And this applies to commercial satellites and to amateur satellites. So all the CubeSats that we're putting up there, they will need to have some method of being able to be directed to the atmosphere to be burnt up at the end of their end of life. The one point we were discussing this beforehand, of course, the FCC is only the US. It's good that they're doing this because it's a start. I personally feel that this kind of regulation to get rid of some of the space junk needs to be done on an international basis by perhaps a part of the UN. Because at the moment, obviously, to add extra technology into your satellites to be able to deorbit them, it's going to cost money. And as we know, everybody doesn't want to spend more money. So if it's an option of launching and having your company based in the middle of West Africa rather than in the US, I suspect some of the larger corporations might consider that option. So while this is a very good idea to start with, and somebody has got to start the idea, let's hope all other countries adopt a similar rule very quickly after this gets implemented, to avoid people simply moving their launch site to one of the many, many other space companies around the world. Back to you, Martin. I can hear you, Leslie.
I can hear you, Leslie. I'm waiting for Caryn.
I'm here. I'm still here. Martin appears to have dropped off.
No, he's here. He passed it to you. What's your thought?
I passed it back to you, Martin.
I know you did. All right. Maybe I don't know what
You were on mute. You were on mute.
What's your thoughts, Caryn?
A few things, Martin. While, as Ed pointed out, you can simply relocate your launch site. Gosh, that would be good business for launch sites overseas. But I seem to remember when Newsline carried this story about a week or two ago, two things stuck in my mind that seemed to be, I don't want to call it an out clause, but it is certainly a softening of what seems to be an otherwise good provision to put in place. Number one is that obviously anything already up there is grandfathered in because you can't, it's already up there. You're not going to be able to do much about what has already been launched. But the other thing is there can be waivers. And if I remember correctly, you can apply on an individual basis to the FCC for waivers. So what sounds like a really blanket sweeping change may not be so. The important thing here is that the FCC has acted and set an example, and I think that does send a clear message to others elsewhere. And it is still a good beginning, even with the waivers and the grandfathered satellites, because, wow, we have a lot of space junk up there, and we do have to do something about it. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I agree with you, Caryn. And in fairness, looking at the report, this is for low Earth orbit satellites. And there are lots of them up there. I mean, we've launched as amateurs quite a few CubeSats and things like that. And according to this, there's 4,800 operating satellites in orbit at the end of last year. That's a hell of a lot of satellites. If most of those are in the low Earth orbit, we're not 100% sure they are. Well, that's a hell of a lot. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'm a little surprised it's taken so long. I guess the reason it hasn't caused more problems, of course, is because it's really a vast area up there. But still, I can really see that. I mean, we already have had this, haven't we? We have collisions with the International Space Station. Some kind of junk hit it at some point, and that's just not a good thing.
Well, it isn't, because that space junk is possibly moving at silly amounts of speed. I mean, the International Space Station is moving at 17,000 miles an hour. You know, if it hits something stationary, it's a 17,000 mile an hour impact. You hit something else coming the other way. Yeah, phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
Very similar to Dan's, in fact. I suppose the only reason there haven't been more collisions is because space is very, very, very big. But I was quite surprised that there weren't provisions along these lines already. So kudos to the FCC for introducing this initiative. And yeah, there is more stuff up there. Anecdotally, I would say in the last 10 years, I've been more aware of reports in the media of meteors being spotted across the sky. There was one that was widely seen across Scotland within the last 2 to 3 weeks, and as far as I know, they're still trying to work out whether that was a piece of space junk or indeed a meteor. There's definitely more stuff up there and more reported sightings, so I wonder if if this gets adopted worldwide, if reports of UFOs and mysterious lights in the sky will increase proportionately. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, the UFO thing, obviously, what I try and explain to people is there are such things as UFOs. Not necessarily spaceships. If it's something that's flying through the air and you can't identify it, what it is, it's a UFO. End of. You know, I was at Gatwick Airport once, one of the jobs I was doing, and I looked up and there was this bright light in the sky in an ellipse, bright light ellipse. And I watched it for a few seconds, and I didn't get excited and tell everybody. And a few seconds later, the plane that it was the sun shining off a plane. And a few seconds later, you could see it was a plane. But for a few seconds, all I could see was a bright ellipse in the air. And so, you know, sometimes you have to wait and see the full result. Sometimes you'll never know what the result is. But I don't think there's little green men coming from Mars, in all honesty. Anyway, Leslie, what's your thoughts?
Oh, I've been listening to interest, and to be honest, everybody's covered the bases, and I think it's called the Big Sky. That's what, you know. That's why there hasn't been many collisions, but there is going to be a problem. The space junk is increasing, and somebody's got to do something about it. And I think the FCC has made the right decision. It has to be done, and I'm going to agree on this point totally. It has to be done on an international scale. Otherwise, people are going to go, you know what, we're going to move somewhere else. And we've seen that with lots of other industries where we've brought in regulations, and should we say the regulations can be quite easily bypassed, but to going somewhere else. So, do I think it's the right thing? Yes. Should it increase to other countries? Certainly. Otherwise, it's simply not going to be effective. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, well, I agree with all of you. And in fairness, hats off for the FCC for at least putting the stick in the ground and saying, right, this is what's got to happen. And I hope that other countries around the world will look at this and go, do you know what? They're right. Let's do similar. Let's make this an international thing. So let's hope that happens. Yeah?
Yeah, sorry, Martin, just a slight correction. We don't give the wrong impression here. There is already a rule, but the current rule is 25 years. So the FCC are bringing in a 5-year rule. And I wonder, Leslie, what your comment on this is. Perhaps this has been forced on the FCC by the fact that there are so many satellites going up to give internet, so satellite-based internet from both US and UK companies. I mean, they're putting up hundreds and thousands of satellites, and that's only just started in the last couple of years. So perhaps that's why they've now said, hang on, we now need to do something about this.
I agree. I think that's very much in the forefront of their minds.
Yeah.
And thank you for the correction.
Yeah, well, I knew there was a 25-year rule, but in fairness, and let's be honest, guys, lots of companies don't even survive 25 years. So if somebody's put a satellite up in space and then they go out of business within 10 years, as a lot of high-tech companies do, whose responsibility is it? So I think it is bringing the rule down a lot quicker is very sensible. Right, let's move to our next news story. University students learn about amateur radio satellites. So there's another satellite to call, and I think this is particularly good because it's a story from India, and they really, in India, really do seem to be pushing amateur radio quite good at the moment. Caryn, what's your thoughts?
This was also a piece we're going to have. In fact, it will be on this week's Newsline coming up. Ham radio is a big, big deal in India. Entire families are hams. I think I've said before, if a family sits down to dinner, I expect the members of the family who don't at least have an HT probably have to go sit in another room and have their dinner there. Just joking, but it is that necessary and that popular. It's used for so many things in India where the infrastructure is not the greatest, especially in small, remote areas where people live. This is a fabulous opportunity for technical students to learn exactly what can be done, not just with satellites, but the curriculum during this half day of instruction included ham radio in general. And the two young women, YLs, who helped present and do some of the demonstrations, I believe are either the daughters or some relative of the organizer himself who was active with AMSAT India. So this is very much very much needed and appropriate, and I expect this to be becoming more commonplace. They've already been invited back, which is great. I'll give it back to you, Martin, and we'll move on.
Yeah, well, the more publicity we get in all countries, and let's face it, the more publicity we get in all countries, the better it actually is, and that's a good one. Leslie, what's your thoughts?
Okay, Martin, I'm reading this story with interest. It is a good story, and it's good to be encouraging students and being informative to what this hobby is about and what it's got to offer. I think in the UK, there's some issues with safeguarding. Unfortunately, we had certain things occur, and it's put a bit of a block on these activities. So it is difficult here, and there's also been changes in the universities. They're becoming much more of a business orientated, much more of a return on investment, and the whole ethos has changed. So I think this is a sort of a long-term seed to sort of create the future engineers, and they're very far-sighted in doing this. And good luck to them. And I hope we get a lot more radio amateurs, and I'm sure we will.
I'm sure we will. And let's say this is one of those things where people are getting very, very interested in technology, which is great, in my opinion. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
I don't really know what to add to this, Martin, and I don't really feel qualified to say much about it because, shockingly, I have only ever worked one station in India, and that wasn't via HF, that was via Echolink, probably the best part of a decade ago. The local repeater to where I was connected, and at the other end there was a 2-meter repeater, and I put a call through and this Indian gentleman answered me. But the thing that stuck in my mind was that the repeater was many tens of miles distant from where he lived, but he told me that he had constructed basically a tower with an enormous 2-meter antenna on top of it, and he had built it all, the tower and the Yagi, using scrap metal and bits and pieces that he had found lying around in the side of the street. So bits of old car engines he'd chopped up to get the metal to make the elements for the Yagi. And I know that that's only one person, and you can't, form an opinion about a whole country based on just one person. But I was so impressed from the way he was speaking. I thought to myself, if this chap is anything like representative of the Indian amateur radio fraternity, then that is a country that is really going places. So all power to him. But beyond that, Martin, about this story specifically, I don't really know if I can add anything back to you.
With the antenna and the mast, that doesn't surprise me at all, because they just build things from. We would just throw it away. We've got too much stuff where they have to make do and make things work, and I think that's great. Good on them.
Yeah, it's a can-do attitude, isn't it? It's a can-do attitude. Whereas certainly in the UK now, most things get just thrown away because people can't be bothered. If it doesn't work, throw it away and buy another one. And there are parts of the world that don't have as many resources as we do. I mean, the original, I'm going off topic here, but the original BitX, the BitX 20 that was designed by Farhan, I mean, he was winding inductors because he didn't have toroids or available to him at the time. He was wiring them on tap washers, Now you laugh, but BitX works.
It's in admiration. It's like, yes, guys, it works.
Yeah, it worked. Anyway, back on track. Dan, what's your thoughts of students in India doing satellites?
Well, I think this is great. And in fact, ARDC has given a grant to some organization in India to develop a CubeSat. So I guess they'll be adding to the space junk problem here shortly. But, India, I think, is really an untapped resource as far as technical talent. And, stuff like this is only going to make it a lot better source.
Yeah, I agree with you. And as I say, when you don't have a lot, sometimes you have a can-do attitude, as I said earlier, and sometimes naivety. You just get on and do something, whereas if everything's plentiful, you think, well, you're thinking all the reasons why you shouldn't do it. But that's another story. Ed, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, echoing what other people have said, but I think India have realised that they need engineers to expand their business and their position in the world. And those engineers may be in the space industry, they may be electronics, maybe radio, all technical engineering. And this university in particular reflects that. And it was good to read on the university's own website how happy and thankful they were that these radio amateurs had come and given these presentations and demonstrations, and they're already planning the next ones. So amateur radio is held with a bit higher regard, I would say, in India than in first world countries. And I think that's a reason being, as the other colleagues here have said, because they will make something work. It's a can-do attitude that is natural for a radio amateur to have a can-do attitude and be a technical person. Yeah, we've got enough people to program computers now. Okay, we've probably got too many people coming out of the universities that can program computer programs, but we haven't got enough coming out that can do technical engineering, be it electronics or be it even road engineering, etc. So I think there's a change, and India is one of the first countries to realise that they need to get those sort of skills into their industries if they're going to, first of all, survive and then expand. So good luck. And Farhan, I believe, is part of the space company, the nationally run space organisation now. I might be wrong on that, but I think I read somewhere that he's now involved actually with the people that are doing India Space. So, another example of somebody who is a radio amateur can basically turn their hand to anything that's needed. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I was saying that's good. And you were saying we do need young people in the hobby. We do need young engineers. Moving to our next news story, and it says 16 new radio amateurs in Cyprus. Okay, 16 is not a mega number for people who live in, say, the UK or the States. But I think Cyprus is a lovely country. I've been there many times. I've met up with quite a few of the amateurs, both expats and nationals, and they don't have the resources like we do. But amateur radio to them is very much a social thing as well. So I think this is a good thing. 16 is good. I'm going to pass it to Leslie. What do you think about it?
I think it's good, Martin. 16 new radio amateurs is up. It's a radio club. That's what we're looking at. I believe, now, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, that they only have the exam once a year. Is that correct, anybody?
That is my belief, Leslie.
Yeah. It's not like here where we can do it online and we've got all the facilities. They have to do it once a year. I believe that we did that when me and you took it, Martin. We had it twice a year, and I believe that was in the early 80s. So they've got to be pretty sure they're going to pass the exam when they go for it. But 16 is a good result, and I wish them well. All the best to them. Great.
Yeah, well, knowing the fact that, if you are an amateur in Cyprus or a visiting amateur in Cyprus, they are very, very hospitable bunch, and I've had many a good time out there. My friend Richard, 5B4AJG, and all the others in that group, really, really good guys. Right, but that's enough of me wittering on. Dan, what's your thoughts as a trainer?
Well, obviously, anytime you get more, the better. I was trying to look up real quick how many amateurs there actually are in Cyprus to see what this increment would be. I wasn't quite successful at doing that yet, but yeah, what's the population of Cyprus? Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't off the top of my head. I would be, and somebody from Cyprus can write to me and tell me I'm wrong, but I'm guessing the number of amateurs in Cyprus will be somewhere between 150 and 200.
Oh, so this is actually a pretty big jump then, probably numbers wise. So that's great.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I mean, I could be totally wrong, but that's the impression I got, about 150 to 200 amateurs in Cyprus, based on some of the photographs I've seen from the AGMs and meeting up with people. So there you go. Caryn, what's your thoughts on it?
Well, I'm all for new licensees, whether it's 1 or 100 or 1,000. I looked in my log to see whether my recollection was correct. I did work a fellow last year. It was last October, in fact, on 20 meters in Cyprus. And good signal from what my records indicate. And it sure would be nice to have more folks there on the air, for more of us to contact. I think even though there's certainly a social element, and people love to get together and hang out, because that's what hams like to do, get together and talk. When we're not on the air getting together and talking, we're getting together locally and talking, and usually some beverages are involved. But how nice it would be to turn on the rig and know that with more hams from Cyprus on the air, there's an even greater chance of logging some folks from there. I think it's great. I don't know why they may only have one exam a year. I know there are some countries that really do just have one exam a year, which is a little unusual for those of us in countries where you can usually pinpoint an exam being given every month or two, like here in the States. But it would be super to know that the demand eventually becomes great enough that perhaps they might schedule the exams just a little more frequently. I think that would be a big help for so many. Back to you, Martin.
I think that would be great. They need more exams.
Yeah, I think they do, but
More opportunity for exams, should I say?
Yeah, I think you're probably right, and they do.
But these are run by the regulator, right? It's not outsourced to the National Society or anything like in the US or the UK or Australia or wherever. It's run by the regulator. So if the regulator decides I'm only doing this on the 14th of September every year, then he's only doing it on the 14th of September.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, Ed, I think you'll find that the exam takes place in Nicosia, which is pretty much in the centre of the country. It's the capital. And Cyprus could take you 4 or 5 hours to go from one side to the other, you know? So pretty much if you do your exam in Nicosia, unless you're living fairly local, you could have a good 2 to 3 hour drive to get there. You know, Paphos to Nicosia, you're looking at a good 2 hours. But hey, that's where they would do it, I would suggest, Ed.
Yeah, my point is it's not being run by somebody that can decide to run it twice or 3 times a year. It's run by the government.
Yeah.
The government says it's once a year, it's once a year.
It's a take it or leave it.
It's a take it or leave it, and you'd have to have a very, very big upsurge in people wanting to do it. I mean, to run it with 16 people, that's probably about a reasonable size for whatever facilities they've got. You know, you'd probably need to hit him with 100 or 150 or something new people, which is unlikely. Looking at QRZ.com, looking at the 5B4 call signs, because I think that's what it is for Cyprus, there's about 320 entries, but that includes holiday call signs that are owned by people in the UK, for example, and club call signs. So my guess would be there's probably 250 licenses issued for people living in Cyprus. How many of those are actually active? Suspect not more than 150. So 16 new adding to that is a good number.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, I was asked if I wanted a 5B4 license one of my visits. And they said, well, we just, they'll accept your UK license and do a reciprocal and whatever. And I'm not being mean or tight, but I can operate with a SEP agreement by putting 5B in front of my call sign, not 5B4. It's actually 5B. And I can operate for up to 3 months. And I was only going out there for 2 weeks at a time. If I'd got a 5B4 call sign, which I could have got, that would cost me £35 a year. Wasn't really cost-benefit analysis didn't really kick in on that one. But there you go. Edmund, any thoughts on this one?
Well, congratulations to all the 16, and as Ed alluded to, hopefully they will be, all or most of them will be active as opposed to merely just holding the licence and not turning the radio on very often. And congratulations especially given that they had the added pressure of knowing that if they didn't pass the exam, they would have to wait a whole year before they could have another go, because that in itself would have added an element of pressure to the whole thing. So, and it's the HAREC exam, isn't it? So that's the equivalent of the UK full licence, I guess, Martin. Yep. Is that right? Yeah. So that further amplifies their achievement. Not that there is anything wrong, of course, with holding the equivalent of a UK foundation or intermediate license. I mean, anybody succeeding in passing an amateur radio exam, that's a success worthy of note and congratulation, obviously. But to go from nothing to the full license in one go, knowing that if you fail, you have to wait a whole year before you can do it again, that's quite an achievement. And if there's 150-ish active licensees possibly on the island, then a further 16 is a significant percentage. So a good news story all round, Martin, I reckon.
Yeah, I thought it was a feel-good story. A feel-good story for amateur radio. Okay, our next news story is Radio Science 2.0. Ham radio activities for kids in Romania. Now, when I pick this one up, I'm always positive to hear of amateur radio being promoted in other countries. And because we are an international podcast, it's nice to sort of tell you stuff that's happening from around the world that the major countries and the major societies wouldn't necessarily make a story out of. But Caryn, I'm going to get you to go first on this one because you've also done a bit more research on this one with the people. There wasn't much in my news story. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Martin. This is an interesting story because it is a personal commitment from a family living in Romania, a college professor who is a YL. She's teaches at the university there. Her husband and their son, who is quite young, but he's a shortwave listener and has ambitions to get his license. And she has been attempting to make amateur radio part of the curriculum, and her husband has been designing courses to help her. And out of this came the wonderful notion that they could develop something greater than that beyond the university campus, an educational curriculum that mixes science and ham radio. And they did that, called it Radio Science 2.0. And they competed to get funding for this from the Romanian American Foundation. And sure enough, this past spring, they were awarded money. That was really the genesis of this. And it's been ongoing now, targeting children, young children, teenagers, and apparently even their parents and grandparents have gotten involved. But they estimate they've reached, since May, about 5,000, which is pretty incredible. These are classes to learn radio theory and to do some hands-on kit building. Best of all, when you talk about counting the numbers for new licensees, the husband who I emailed directly with told me that most recently about 40 of the young people that they had in these courses took their exam and got their license. So he's moving forward from this, always thinking ahead, which is a good thing. And he would like at some point down the line to build a center for ham radio science right in the city there. I don't imagine that's in the next year or so, but he sees this as the genesis of something greater. Ham radio is very popular in Romania, and he's doing his part. His wife is doing her part to see that the next generation really, really keeps up the work as they grow into this hobby. And that's what we had, Martin. Back to you.
Yeah, well, as I say, it's a very positive story with people actually doing things, which I really like. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
Again, there's not really much I can add to this. I don't know very much about amateur radio in Romania. I've not worked many stations from that country. Something I am mindful of with my broadcast shortwave listener hat on is that Romania remains very active on the air. They've got a very powerful long wave transmitter on 153 kilohertz. They've still got, I think they're still present on medium wave, And on shortwave, Radio Romania International is one of the few broadcasters within Europe that has not scaled back or discontinued altogether their external broadcast service. If you tune across most of the shortwave broadcast bands, apart from China Radio International, Radio Romania International is the one that you will probably hear on more frequencies more often than pretty much anybody else. So maybe radio of all flavours is very much a thing still in Romania. But beyond that, on the amateur front, I'm afraid I can't really offer any words of wisdom, Martin. Back to you.
Yeah, okay, no problems. Well, while you were talking, I thought I'll just check the ICQ Digital Project group. And sure enough, Romania's in it. It's one of the countries that's communicated with the ICQ podcast group. So that's quite a good one. Right. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think this just points out that amateur radio is still really, no matter what we say about computers and all that, amateur radio still is a good on-ramp for learning about science and for kids, or encouraging kids to get enter technical careers. And as you pointed out earlier, we're going to need engineers and scientists in the future. We sometimes our generation seems to think that everything begins and ends with us, but of course it doesn't. And promoting amateur radio as a on ramp to these things is really, I think, the best way to go. That's it.
Certainly is. So I'm pleased about it. Leslie, what's your thoughts?
Well, I've been listening with interest on this one, and I read through it, and a couple of things that sort of came to mind. I'm not convinced that really, really big projects work, but it does where you've got, to find a better phrase, sort of a project champion with the enthusiasm and spark that wants to make things happen. And this is absolutely ideal, and they can push things through and they can make things happen. And this is exactly what they're doing here. And good luck to them. I think it's brilliant. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, that's really a good one, as you say. Ed, last words on this one?
As Caryn said, 5,000 people went through the course. Well, the course wasn't just sit down and watch some PowerPoint slides or whatever. It was actually practical as well. So they actually got people building things as well and
doing things.
Doing things, that's right. And apparently the thing that attracted the parents and the grandparents the most was construction, doing things and building things. And we can learn a lot from this. Yeah, not every country is the same, but I think most countries are short of technical people, and anything that can get people into the technical hobby and then possibly also as a career, if it's students, is good for the country, not just good for the hobby. And maybe that's how we should be marketing amateur radio, as a very useful training tool to get people into the industries that are starting to be short of enough technicians. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I agree. And as I say, this episode seems to be a lot about youngsters and training and opportunity. And I think, we've really covered that well this episode. I'm going to move to our next news story. The ITU elects a ham from the US as the new Secretary General. Caryn, you put this one in. I think that Doreen, from what I've heard and read, she's going to make an absolutely A1 person for this job. Over to you, Caryn.
Martin, I couldn't agree more. She already has had a rather ambitious agenda, being an advocate for involving young people. And I think the fact that you have someone in the top spot who is an amateur radio operator clearly will not let amateur radio become an afterthought. Not that it is now, but still, being a ham, I think, gives the rest of the amateurs throughout the world a little bit of an edge, knowing we've got a member of the team, a real member of the team, up in the top spot. I think there's also an acknowledgement that, you know, we refer to this often in this podcast. It makes us sound like a bunch of dinosaurs, but at some point, you know, we are going to march toward the sunset. I don't want to say we'll march into it, but we will march toward the sunset in our activity on the air and on the planet. And what she has foremost in her mind is to cultivate involvement of not just the next generation, but probably the generation after that, and to lay the groundwork to ensure that our activities as hams continue in perpetuity, even as the hobby itself is changing. So I see great things. I think the short answer to your question is I do see great things. I see a strong advocate. And it's not insignificant that she is the first woman to hold this spot. I mean, a woman or a man can do the job just as well. It's just notable and commendable that in addition to being a ham, she is also a YL. That's a point of pride, I do believe. Martin, I'll send it back to you.
Yeah, no problems, Caryn. As I say, like you said, great news for her. Ed, what's your thoughts on this one?
There's very little to add. Well done. And yeah, read the call sign, and I thought, hang on, Caryn's got a new job. KD2GTX. No, not KD2GUT. Close. But yeah, good to have a ham up there. Good to have a lady leading the ITU as Secretary General. And yeah, let's hope that that's something that she does indeed get the industry in general to realise that youngsters need to get into technology, not just into computing.
That's correct. All things are starting to have interlinks between the electronics, the radio industry, all these things, and computers, and we have to have these interlinks. So whatever you learn on one works on other things. Edmund, what's your thoughts, mate?
Yeah, I agree with Caryn. As notable and wonderful as it is that the new person in charge happens to be a lady, of equal, if not more significance, is the fact that she is a licensed amateur radio operator. So I'm very pleased to hear this, and hopefully it will stand the hobby in good stead, Martin.
Yeah, no problems at all, mate, and you're dead right. Dan, I'm sure you'll be blogging about this as well if you haven't already, and if you've already done it, Dan, I apologise for not catching up with your blog. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I actually haven't, but this is sort of another story. We're talking about youth. It says right here, under her leadership, the ITU focused on giving youth more of a voice in strategy and programs. So, I mean, this is great.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's I think all the stories we've picked today have all been very, very positive. What's your thoughts, Leslie?
I think Caryn's covered everything, and I think everything she's covered is absolutely spot on. I've got nothing else to add on that. All good.
Yeah, I think, as I say, we've hit this one on the nail, and that was a good one added by Caryn at the last minute. So thank you for doing that for us, Caryn. Ed, you threw this one in at the last minute as well, so I'm going to get you to go first. It looks like the Swiss have got a ban on the sale of Anytone transceivers, the handy talkies, and it looks like it might be the 878 UV. So what's your thoughts, Ed?
Yeah, well, we've covered this kind of thing previously in New Zealand and I think in the US as well, where certain models of handy talkie from the Far East have not met specifications and have been banned from import and or from sale to amateurs. In some countries, these radios are allowed to be sold to amateurs, but not to commercial usage, etc. In this case, it is just one, or according to this report, it's only one, which is the Anytone ATD878UV Plus. I don't know what the difference between the Plus is and the earlier standard UV model is, but in any case, they have the Ofcom, which is the Swiss Ofcom, the regulator, have put that radio on the list of not allowed to be imported and sold radios. That list, actually, and there's a link in the article on the ICQ podcast website, is actually very long. Everybody knocks the cheaper Chinese radios. Usually Anytone gets a good reference from radio amateurs as being a slightly better quality, being a little bit more expensive, more work being done on it, etc. The list itself is actually very long, and I would actually suggest to some of the listeners, if they're interested, to take a look at that online at the USKA website to see if theirs is on the list as well. The USKA are basically saying they believe this might be a mistake on the part of Ofcom, that they have measured this radio against the standard that's used for PMR radios and not the standard that should be used for amateur radio. And that's what they're waiting for a reply on at the moment. They want to clarify the legal situation. And we've discussed this before we started the recording. PMR radios tend to be used by less technical people, unlicensed people, and they tend to be locked down more, so restricted features. Whereas for the amateur market, a radio can have a lot more features. It can have the keypad, you can change things on it because you are trained, you are licensed, and hopefully you know what you're doing. So this may be the only thing on this particular one, and the Anytone ATD878UV might come off the list once USKA have clarification. So stay on the list for not to be sold for PMR, but okay for amateur radio. We'll wait and see, but it's actually an eye-opener to take a look at that list, and I'd recommend the listeners do that. I don't know how this affects it if you are actually travelling on holiday into Switzerland. The regulations here are related to the import and sale. So I presume if somebody's bought one of the radios on the list in another country and they're travelling there, I would hope it's not a problem, but you never know. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, it does. Well, we need to find out in some point in time. My understanding of the model numbers for the Anytone ATD878UV, which is the UHF and VHF Plus, that one is able to store 200,000 DMR IDs, and it has a blue button on the top because I have one sitting in front of me. Before you had the Plus, it was an orange button, and I think it stored something like 100 or 150,000 or 100,000 addresses, IDs. There is a new one out, and it's the AT-D878UV Plus 2, and that can hold. It's pretty much exactly the same radio, apart from it's got more memory and it can hold up to 500,000 DMR IDs. And when I bought mine, I didn't think the 200,000 would ever be hit. I am wrong. So, yeah. But apart from that, I'm waffling a little bit because we don't know what it's failed on. It is my belief from memory, and I haven't looked at it right this second, but it's my belief from memory that you have two options with the Anytone programming software, where you can either put it into DMR mode or you can put it into amateur mode. But bearing in mind, you can also set this up for transmitting APRS, which you wouldn't want in a PMR industry. And the other thing that they quite often probably wouldn't want you to have in true PMR is the ability to have VHF and UHF having a dual band at pure DMR stuff. So if you don't know what you're doing, that might be what they're blocking it on. But we need more information.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, I've just been in and checked the list again, and it is only, so something's changed since this news report came out, it seems. It's only the Plus model. The other models are not listed from Anytone, and it's only now banned for PMR. So it's no longer in the banned list for amateur funk, for amateur radio. So it looks like the USKA, or the UKSA, sorry, have got this changed. So it's becoming a bit of a non-story for us in some ways, but it's still interesting to have a look at this this list of the I don't know, 100 radios in it or something. It's a lot of radios there, but as I said, the Anytone is now only restricted for use with PMR. It's okay for amateur radio.
Yeah, well, I would suggest that since it's the same PA stage and the same hardware and all the bits and pieces, it isn't going to be an emissions problem. It might be the amount of power, because they will run 7 watts in the turbo mode. You might have to lock the power down and things like that. But that's pretty much all I can think of, and I'm on it, because the hardware is going to be the same whatever mode you put it in, even if whether you have it amateur or thing. And I'm taking up too much time. Leslie, you play a little bit with PMR radio. What's your thoughts?
Well, I was thinking about that, and the comments have already been alluded to, that PMR does tend to be more, shall we say, type-approved equipment, restrictive, lower skill, should we say, a lower skilled operator. So when you sort of look at amateur radio equipment that can basically sing and dance and do exactly what you want, and those two things are not necessarily compatible. I think this is probably the issue. You've also got interpretations with on the regulations, and I think it can be solved by basically the company and their equivalent of Ofcom of sitting down and saying, "Yep, you're allowed to do this. This is what you can do, and this is what you can't do, and this is the way these things are solved." Technology is probably, should we say, advancing the regulation, slightly advanced of the regulations. So it's a case of pulling back what we can do, and I'm sure it'll sort itself out in the end. But that's my take on it.
Yeah, I think you're right, mate. I think you're right. Dan, you got any thoughts on this one?
The only thing I can think of is it seems like the Swiss amateur radio group there is on top of it. So, like Leslie just said, it'll all get sorted out real soon now, if not already.
Yeah, it'll all come out in the wash. And most of the cheap PMR rigs can either be put into commercial or amateur mode. And I believe here in the UK, they like you to have type approved. If you're selling out, then they don't want you to have dual band if you're selling it to people. Let's go with Edmund. Edmund, you got an Anytone. Are you worried about?
No, I'm not worried about it. The one that I won in an eBay auction is the very latest one, which is the 878 Plus 2, which does indeed contain the 500,000 entries for DMR IDs, and has got a green button on the top rather than a blue one. Not that the colour of the button on the top makes any difference as regards Swiss authority restrictions, I'm sure. But I wouldn't have any qualms about using it from an emissions point of view or any other point of view, really. So, no concerns at this end, Martin.
Yeah, well, it's a radio that a lot of us amateurs on the podcast or podcast operators actually have in this country, and I think it's a great little radio. Right, Caryn, have we left you anything to say on this, I'm afraid?
No, there's nothing for me to say, but I've been listening with great interest and learning a bit since my DMR radio is the Titera MD380, but it's been nice hearing all of this input and just learning a little bit more. I don't do any GMRS. I've toyed with the idea, but nothing to add at this point, Martin.
Yeah, it's one of those news stories, as Ed said. It got exciting. It's calming down now. Unless we knew the full report on this one, I don't think the radio's a problem. I just think it's they've suddenly spotted that it can do a lot more in, it can do a lot more in PMR mode than they want it to. That's all. And I think you could solve that by programming it down, dumbing it down in the programming. So, yeah, all in all, some good news stories. Right, let's find out what everybody's been up to since the last time I was here. Caryn, ladies first. Off you go.
Okay, I can't promise anything too exciting or interesting at this point. I did launch my my adventures in Portable, which I'm happy about. Got some really good results and some DX, and unfortunately haven't made it to a park yet, but we've been testing everything out in the garden, and all is going well as I learn the operation of the rig and, of course, the best configuration for the buddy pole. So what I've been preoccupied with at the moment, and it's not terribly exciting unless you've been through it yourself, which is basically to get a bit more conversant in CW. I seem to be able to pick out the calls and to get the QSOs. And we're concentrating now on advancing into the realm of a RAGCHU. Even a QRS RAGCHU is a nice victory because it means my brain doesn't freeze up on me if I hear something other than a signal report or a QTH. So that's really where my priorities have been right now, and I'm going to continue with that. But beyond that, nothing I'd put up in neon lights for the last few weeks except those activities, Martin.
Well, you must have enjoyed yourself, which is the important thing. And, you're doing something I can't because I'm a failure to our Dan because I don't do Morse, but I do try. But I say, at least you're enjoying yourself. Dan, I'm sorry I wasn't baiting you, honest.
You're not a failure to me at all, Martin.
But what have you been up to, Dan?
Well, she said it doesn't sound exciting. Well, it sounds exciting to me. It sounds like you're making good progress in CW. And look, I'm ready to do the slow speed RAGCHU with you anytime. So just keep that in mind. So as far as what else I've been doing is teaching. I went to the GNU radio conference last week and taught a ham class there. And this one was a little different because we didn't have as much time as I usually need for a one-day tech class. But since it was a real technical group, I actually skipped like the first 5 chapters in my book, which are all the technical topics. I figured these folks already knew about antennas and wavelength, such as that, and focused on the amateur radio specific stuff like operating procedures and rules and regulations. And I achieved 18 out of 20 passed the test. And one of the fellows at the conference, one of the conference organizers said, well, we'll assume that those 2 that failed didn't attend your workshop. So maybe I can go for 100% there. But yeah, that's about all I've been doing, actually, doing these conferences and teaching classes. I'm actually going to teach another one this coming Saturday. So in fact, this one is actually good because it's the first in-person class here in Ann Arbor that I'll have taught. And so since the pandemic started, of course. And so I'll be interested to see how that goes. But that's it from here.
I was going to say, Dan, I always find it great fun when I teach a bunch of amateurs. I think it's great fun. I always learn something from them as well, even if it's having to work out a different way of explaining how something works. But I can agree with you that you've had a good time, Dan. I can say
one little funny story that I'll tell. One of the guys was, he's been used to using kind of low power stuff. I didn't get exactly what he was doing, but I said, with a technician class license, you can use up to 1,500 watts of power, and he said 1,500 watts. So I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, I must admit, I have a US license, and when we was over, I could have used 1,500 watts. I think the most I used was, I was thinking of 5 watts because we only had handy talkies with us, but we did use Frank's HF rig in the front yard of the place where we stayed. So I don't know what power we were doing there, but it wouldn't have been more than 100 watts for definite. So anyway, we all enjoyed ourselves, but it sounds like you've had a great fun. Let's find out what Ed's been up to. Ed, do you want to go first?
Well, I'll go next. Well, I can boast a little bit that after probably a couple of years of trying to get my home station working as I want it, I've now got it set up such a way that in the last couple of weeks, every couple of days, I've been able to make contacts down into VK on 20 metres. And that does sound a bit like boasting, but it's all a matter of getting everything right. And it's always the receive side you need to work a lot on more than the transmit. You can always push more power up the spout if you're legally qualified to do so. But if you've got high noise levels and low signal levels, you're never going to hear the station from the other end. So I'm rather happy with the guy loop and the combination of that with the Pre-Selector and the Icom IC7300 and a 300 watt amp. So that was it. And it's so much so now that we've some of the people I talked to in Australia saying, no, this is getting too easy. This is sideband on 20 metres, by the way, via long path. So I've been out portable and worked the same people with 20 watts and a wire at 5 metres up in the air. Still too easy. So we're going down the scale. I've now put together for myself a pedestrian mobile over-the-shoulder little bag with a QRP transceiver and a loaded vertical connected to it. And that's the next thing we'll try to make some DX with. Of course, band conditions are very good at the moment. This wouldn't be the case if band conditions were not good. But basically, I'm going down in power. I'm going down in antenna capabilities. And at some point, obviously, I'm not going to be able to make the contacts anymore. But it's quite a bit of fun to do that rather than pumping the power up all the time. Turn the power down and get a bit more portable. And the added advantage of the little pedestrian mobile setup is that it's easy to throw in a bag somewhere if you're travelling with an aircraft or whatever. And so I'm looking forward to using that perhaps away on holiday sometime. We'll see, but generally enjoying the hobby. And of course, the season for the most operating is coming up now with winter and the snow and the ice and the minus 30 degrees, where I'll probably be heading off to some SOTA summits again. Back to you, Martin.
Oh, you make it so appealing, minus 30 degrees and snow. Thank you, Ed. Oh, dear. Yeah, but it sounds like you've had a great fun. Great fun there. Edmund, what have you been up to?
In terms of amateur radio, virtually nothing that I can remember. I've returned to my roots in the last month or so, which is broadcast listening. There have been so many things going on worldwide, the death and funeral of Queen Elizabeth, the war in Ukraine, the economic situation in the UK, recent political developments concerning the new Prime Minister, all that kind of thing. that I've just really been listening to the news a lot on Radio 4 on 198 kilohertz long wave and Radio 5 Live on 693 kilohertz medium wave locally. I've been doing so much broadcast listening, I don't think I've done any amateur radio at all. I might have had maybe one or two local QSOs on 2 meters FM, but aside from that, nothing springs to mind. But I am very much looking forward to attending the Newark National Hamfest, which is coming up very, very soon, Martin.
Yeah, you're dead right. We're off to Newark in a couple of weeks' time, or just over a week after this podcast gets released. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that one too, mate. Right, let's see what Leslie's been up to. How are you doing with things, Leslie?
Oh, what can I say, Martin? I finished with the railway, so I've been having a lot of spare time. So I've been catching up with all sorts of stuff. First of all, we had the Silverthorne Radio Club Camp GX2HR, located at Lambourne End. And I've got to say, for a camp, that was very successful indeed. And we got the equipment up and running, and that was all good. And we did actually take along my AA35 antenna analyzer, which was a godsend, because I actually knew what was happening to the antennas as opposed to guess as we used to do in previous years. Other things, I sorted out the radios for the Bluebell Beer Festival, another hobby of mine. So they got me doing all the electrical stuff in the background. And there's a little 49 project that I put to one side and stayed in the cupboard. Anyway, I've had a massive clear out of all. That's all gone, and everything's a lot cleaner. So I thought, yeah, I'm gonna work on that project. So that's on the bench at the moment. And one other thing of note, which I think people will be interested in, the RSGB has brought out there's a subject on RF safety. And there was a thing before about it. They were waiting for the calculations for below 10 megahertz. They've actually done that. It is out. It is usable. And they've done some things on pre-arranged configurations. So if you've got standard configurations, all you need to do is follow the guidelines and you'll be absolutely fine. But I'm busy reading up on that at the moment. So it's been a tad busy, Martin. Over to you.
Well, Leslie, it sounds like you've been up to a lot of things and enjoying yourself. But one thing I need to tell you.
Go on.
I had a conversation. All right, it was on the digital group the other day, and I was talking to a mate of yours.
What was his name?
Denny.
I know Denny.
I know you do. He knows you well. GM1BAN, I believe. Denny.
Yes.
Denny sends his regards to you.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
We had quite a long chat. So, yeah, that was a good one. So I meant to tell you, but we've told you on air now. So that's
I used to work with Denny many years ago.
He said so. And he's a nice guy. And
great guy.
Yeah. Right, what have I been up to apart from talking to Leslie's mates? Well, I'm going to first off start off and remind everybody, please update your hotspots if you don't. At some point in time in the very near future, you may lose access to the ICQ podcast digital group because we will be shutting off some servers shortly. At the moment, I'm parallel running, but pretty much everything's now over on the new boxes, and you shouldn't have noticed any difference. I had an absolute nightmare. I decided to buy another MMDVM board, which is the digital board you sit on top of a Raspberry Pi and turn the Raspberry Pi into a hotspot. So I thought, okay, yeah, I'll order one. Well, I looked round and there was Amazon was selling them. Okay, so Amazon was great. And I ordered one and it arrived the next day because Carol's got Prime. And I put it together, built the hotspot up, and I tried it out. And it was received from the internet and it would transmit, but it wouldn't receive anything local. The receiver was not working. The transmitter part was, but the receiver wasn't. So I sent it back and ordered another one. And that arrived. And I put it in. Well, this one had no transmit and no receive. He was receiving information from the internet. He was telling me all the bits and pieces, but no RF out and no RF in. And I spent too long, really, about 3 days, trying to work out what was wrong with this thing. I eventually found, with a mega magnifying glass, that there was a inductor missing off the board, which probably was the reason why it didn't work. But since this thing's the size of a grain of sand and I didn't have one, it went back to get me money back. And I was a bit disappointed, but I got another one on order anyway. So I wanted to do some more testing, and that's what I'm up to. But like everything, if you have a problem like that, you learn a lot. I downloaded the technical spec for the transmitter receiver chip, and I had to read about that. That was interesting. Also found out some other stuff on hotspots and what you can do and how you can change, reprogram the firmware for them. That's the MMDVM board, not Pi-Star itself. How you can reprogram the MMDVM board with latest firmware. That was interesting. And I also found a circuit diagram. There's only one place on the internet I found it, and it's interesting to look at, but it's a very, very simple operation. The worst thing I did on amateur radio, I suppose, was, as a family have gone down to one car, Mrs. B's car, as she refers to it, and I can't be bothered to argue about that one. But because we're down to one car, mine has to have a radio in it, doesn't he? So I've been trying to find how to fit an amateur radio into a 2-year-old car without drilling any holes and hiding all the cables and making it look neat and tidy. Well, I think I achieved that early Saturday evening. And at the time, I sat in the drive seat, I switched the radio on, and the radio came up and looked all screwy. I thought, oh no. And at that time, all the lights went out on the dashboard. And I went into panic mode and thought, oh, I've done something. Maybe I've wired it wrong, or power, interference between microprocessors, because I'd run the cables down the cable trays and had trim off and put them all in there. And then I got half the radio uninstalled before the brain woke up. And I thought, hang on a minute. With a hybrid car, you've got a 200 odd volt battery under the back seat to drive the electric motors, but you have a 12 volt battery, and that 12 volt battery runs all the other computers and the lights and all such things. Measured it, it was at 7.5 volts. And on investigation, what had happened is the car had been in various modes, and every time I put it on the accessory, I'd also knock the one of the heated seat switches on. So the heated seat switch on the passenger side had drained the battery for me. That was a bit of a panic, but you can't jumpstart a hybrid car. They don't like you to do it. They say not to. I ended up taking one of the battery leads off the battery and charging it with a battery charger. And even then, it was enough to start the car, but it took about 3 miles or so before the electronics came back online, which was a bit strange, but they all came on eventually. But what I will say is, if any of you got a hybrid car and you flatten the 12-volt battery for any reason, if somebody offers you a jump start, don't let them do it, because you can't jump start the generator. What you can do is take one of the battery connectors off, put your jump start leads across the battery so you're in parallel with your their main battery, and your battery in parallel with theirs, and then just ask them to rev their car at about 1500 revs. After about 5 minutes, that will put a big enough charge in to get you sorted. I didn't have that option. I had a little battery charger, so I had to wait about 4 or 5 hours to get enough power in. But that's an option for you. Yeah, been playing VHF and UHF as always. On the talk group, we ended up with one more country, and the ICQ podcast talk group, one more country, the Philippines, connected last month. So we're now up to 47 countries that have come through on our digital group. And as Edmund said, the weekend after this podcast gets released, we're in Newark. We're up in Newark at the National Hamfest. So, guys, if you're going, look out for the orange shirts. We'll be there. And, yeah, just be very careful of Mrs. B. She doesn't do amateur radio, right? So she'll be there and she'll wind you up, but she doesn't do amateur radio. But she knows
Does she
more.
have an orange shirt?
Oh, she has an orange shirt and she knows more than she lets on most of the time. So, yeah, she's orange shirted as well, Dan. Hers says Mrs. B, where yours and mine says a call sign. So that's what we're up to. That's what I've been up to. So, yeah, busy. We've all been busy. So all that's left for me to do now is to thank you all for turning up tonight, and we'll move on to the next part of the podcast. I'd like to thank Caryn, KD2GUT.
You're very welcome. It's always my pleasure, Martin, and I will find and wear an orange shirt next week to be in solidarity with you. Have fun.
That's great. We must get you a shirt at some point in time. I know Colin's tasked with ordering new shirts at some point in time, but we'll do that for you soon, Caryn. And yeah, that's good. I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU.
Well, you're very welcome. I'm glad I was able to make it.
Yeah, I'm glad you did, Dan, because you always bring something good to the table. I'd like to thank Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG.
Thanks for having me on, Martin.
No problems at all, mate. And Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP. Thanks for joining us.
Yep, thanks for the invite as always, Martin. Great to be on, and look forward to the next one. And for me, 4 weeks' time.
Yeah, 4 weeks' time. And because he hasn't been around much recently, we decided to get him on this one. And Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G0CIB. Thanks for joining us, Leslie.
Thanks for inviting me, Martin. It's a lot of people on tonight, which is good, and some really interesting topics.
Yeah. And don't forget, you're on in 2 weeks' time, Leslie.
Okay, it's in my note.
Okay. Right. Then I'll say,
Cheerio.
73s to you all.
Cheerio.
73.
73.
For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief with me, Colin M6BOY. Start off with news that Region 1 Youth Working Group, the IARU, is working on a project that during the month of December, several young hams under the age of 26 will become active with YOTA suffixes to their call sign. The idea behind this is to show the amateur radio hobby to the youth and to encourage youngsters to become active on the ham radio waves. So every operator can support the youth worldwide by making contacts with, these prefixes, helping improve their skills and learn more about the geography and ham radio abbreviations along the way. They'll be happy to obviously exchange attention and contact information with you, and licensed and unlicensed youth will be making QSOs with, obviously their usual restrictions, and could be made aware their first contact the hobby to give them the best experience possible from our side for now. As every year, there's an award program available. Work as many YOTA stations on the band modes as possible to be eligible for either a bronze, silver, gold, or even a platinum award for free. There'll also be wooden plaques for best achieving radio hams worldwide available once again. So lots of information on this for you. Best thing to do is to direct you to the group's event page, events.ham-yota.com, for more information on this, and a worthwhile one to get into your diary for December. This weekend, as we relieve, AMSAT-UK International Space Colloquium is taking place, and they'll be doing lots of streaming to a global worldwide audience. So I say it's all about building and operating amateur radio satellites to beginners who wish to find out more about the fantastic branch of the hobby. Will be one of the main attractions there. Also roundups including a number of live and potentially a spacecraft project that are underway and being investigated and developed, etc. So there'll be live streaming over the weekend as we release, but knowing the guys here, this stuff will be available post-show as well. So we'll put links again on icqpodcast.com for you, and you can check out those at your convenience. Continuing the theme of the event season, as we mentioned, UK Hamfest is next weekend as well. The RSGB's convention this year is going to be more of a hybrid event, which will include a live streaming arm as well. So conventional chats with influential amateur radio leaders, informal interviews with board members, opportunity to find more about special interest groups attending the convention, and a chance to meet the new Radcom editorial team. So again, there's going to be a full live program available on the RSGB's webpage, which we'll put a link to again on icqpodcast.com. So if you can't attend this event in person, there's an opportunity to find out more information, as I say, via these live streams. Right, well, now we're going to head over to our features episode. This feature is a collection of hardware reviews by Ed Durrant at DD5 Lima Papa. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast.
In this feature, I'd like to give you 3 short reviews on some items I have bought to extend my enjoyment of our hobby of amateur radio. These reviews will be my opinion of the products, all of which I bought myself. These are not review units. I will not go into any really deep detail, as I'm sure if I spark some interest on one of the items, you will go to the internet to find out more detailed information. Item 1. A new radio. The Zygo G106 ultra-portable HF transceiver. Think of this as a HT for the HF bands. It is small, smaller even than the well-known Yaesu FT817ND, and in fact, part of the reason that I bought the Zygo is because I regret having sold my FT817 a few years ago. There have been several reviews of this radio, one of them being rather unprofessional and abusive. However, that reviewer had been supplied a faulty pre-production unit. My review is of a production model, the same as everyone else can buy. I bought mine from Radio Oddity because they have a warehouse in Berlin, but there are different distributors in different countries. This is an SDR radio, and as soon as we say SDR, the reviewers start looking for all the features they are used to seeing on a $1,500 plus radio on this $350 one. SDR is an architecture where lots of new features can be implemented via software rather than hardware. In my understanding of SDR, it is a direct conversion transceiver, meaning the RF signal gets converted straight to audio frequencies where software can process it. Most would say that the minimum that an SDR radio these days must have is a waterfall, so that you can see where stations are on the part of the band where you are operating. The Zygo G106 has a waterfall, but it doesn't have all of the adjustable filtering that many are used to, at least not on SSB, and it doesn't have other things like RF gain. This missing functions gets held up by reviewers as faults, but the problem is that Zygo didn't clearly define the role of this radio when they released it. After an email conversation with one of the Zygo engineers, it is clear that this radio tries very hard to be a simple, uncomplicated, basic radio that fits the needs of the growing numbers of portable operators who need a radio that can take some knocks and simply work when it is turned on. A side benefit from this is when I saw a post from a white stick operator who had bought a G106 and said how happy he was with the radio because it is so basic and simply works when turned on. What do I think of the radio? I also fell into the missing features trap until I had that conversation with Zygo, and when you look at it as an intentionally simple radio with a good receiver and up to 10 watts PEP output on the HF bands, 80 metres through 10 metres, it's a good radio. Zygo only say a minimum of 5 watts, but it seems that 8 to 9 watts or more is normal, and in my case even 14 watts on 12 metres. At present, there is no way to turn the power down. You get full power all the time. Again, going back to this simple and basic ideology. The radio does not have an internal battery pack, but as it will run from almost any external DC supply of 9 to 16 volts, that is less of an issue, and I run mine from a 2.5 amp hour 3S LiPo battery that I used to use in my old FT817. I use this radio on SSB, which is where it has the least features, and although audio is a bit thin, it works. I have now added a slightly larger OEM microphone, originally intended for use with the VHF HT, to get more bass in the transmit audio, but that was my personal choice. When this radio is used for CW, it has more features. It has 3 receive filter widths and an internal keyer that has all the usual settings and will work with all common Morse key types. Moving to data, and using this radio with the DE19 interface box, operation is really plug and play. As soon as your computer software asks for data mode, the radio switches mode and filter and disables microphone input and speaker output, and it just works. Perhaps this radio is more angled towards digital data mode and CW operators, but even on SSB, I think its usage simplicity could be a game changer in the portable operations market. I'd like to see the radio sold around the $250 price rather than the $350 one. Not because I don't think it is worth $350, but because the G106's big brother, the G90, is only $100 more at $450, with more power and lots more features. Would I recommend the G106 to someone looking for a portable radio? As long as they intend to use a resonant antenna, G106 has no ATU, I would say yes. Its simplicity of operation when portable is a big plus. So much so that I have built my G106 into an over-the-shoulder bag with a loaded adjustable HF whip as a complete pedestrian mobile solution that can be packed in a very small space when travelling. Item 2. Bavarian Contest Club HF Pre-Selector. My next purchase is a HF Pre-Selector, and although I found a built one on sale, this is really a design for a kit or homebrew. First of all, what is a pre-selector, and why do I need one? Going back to the SDR radio and what it is from the last item, like a lot of people, I have an Icom IC7300 SDR transceiver. As I said before, these radios are effectively direct conversion units. While the 7300 has some band filtering ahead of the conversion, you cannot tune this as we would in the older non-SDR receiver front ends, and the result is that any strong signal, even those from outside of the ham band in use, can dampen the received gain across the band, and when trying to pull in that weak VK or ZL SSB signal out of the noise at the bottom of the solar cycle, you don't want this happening. In Icom's better SDR radio, the IC7610, they have addressed this problem with what they call Digicel Pre-Selectors in the front end. In fact, their description of this feature on their website echoes what I have just said, where they say, and I am quoting directly from the Icom website, the Digicel Pre-Selectors are RF filters with sharp, narrow passband characteristics, preventing analog to digital converter overflow from large out-of-band signals when sampling the RF signals. Additionally, the third and high-order IMD components are reduced. This is ideal when strong signals are received in a contest pile-up or from broadcast stations on adjacent frequencies or bands." End quote. Very few people would consider going inside their IC7300 to add this circuitry, and neither would I. So I started experimenting with adding simple adjustable tuned circuits into my antenna cable, and even these crude components made a difference. Of course, I would need a separate tuned circuit for each band, and I would need to arrange some transmit-receive switching, as the IC7300 has no separate receive antenna socket, although there is a third-party add-on that can provide this. On looking around on the web for an external pre-selector unit, I happened upon the Bavarian Contest Club's website, and a solution based on a design from DL7AV and updated to use the currently available components in 1996. The club produced 50 PCBs and kits of parts. Their members immediately saw the benefit of these units during contests, even in the pre-SDR era. Search in Google under Bavarian Contest Club Pre-Selector to find the page, which includes the circuit diagram and history. It's in English. These units do not have receive-transmit switching, as contest standard radios from the 90s mostly had a separate receive-only antenna port. I have added the needed switching into the built unit which I bought. These units also have support for 3 additional receive-only antennas, and so makes a very useful addition to anyone's shack. I was lucky to find the very well-made unit on eBay. As far as I know, the boards are no longer available from the Bavarian Contest Club. However, an inquiry could not hurt, and perhaps others will see, as I have, the need for this external pre-selector unit with today's entry-level SDR radios. My third review is of a 1 kilowatt PEP SWR bridge and power meter from DJ9PK. I heard about this unit through a German-language YouTube ham radio channel and followed it up, as I have always wondered what the output from my amplifier or radios really are in peak envelope power. Normal SWR power meters average their readings, which is fine for FM or key-down CW signals, but on SSB they do not indicate what you are actually putting out in PEP. Even the ones with the little PEP switch don't give a true value. And normally you need to be looking at $600 to $1,000 or more to buy a professional PEP power meter. Along comes the power of the microcontroller, cheaper displays, and a very skilled ham who has produced this 1 watt to 1 kilowatt PEP reading or standard reading SWR and power meter with a 3.5-inch colour touch screen for use on the HF bands. It runs off a 6 to 15 volt 120 mA DC supply. There are options to have the unit built to handle up to 1.6 kilowatt, and all units will work on 50 MHz, but not at the same accuracy as below 30 MHz, which is plus or minus 3%. The unit displays forward and reverse power in either a bar or dial form, along with the SWR value. At the time of recording, Theo sells the unit from his website, dj9pk.de Delta Juliet 9 Papa Kilo Delta Echo for €185 plus shipping costs. He builds to order, so there can be a delay, and I don't know if he ships outside of Germany. The work is first class, and the unit simply works. Something I found out which was very interesting: putting this bridge before and after your ATU will show you exactly how much power you are losing by not using an antenna that is resonant on the band in use. Well, those are my 3 short reviews. I hope you found them useful. This was Ed, DD5LP, for the ICQ podcast.
Whether it's across the pond or over the channel, the ICQ podcast is international.
Herzlich willkommen in Deutschland.
Good evening.
73 de España.
By amateurs, for amateurs.
Well, many thanks to our friend and colleague Ed Durrant, DD5 Lima Papa, for his collection of mini reviews there on some of the latest ham radio hardware he's been using, and thanks Ed for that. We'd really appreciate your feedback and comments there via usual way, either via the website at icqpodcast.com or via any social media channel you so wish to choose. But it'd be great to hear what you think. Now we're just a few days, one whole week, next weekend away from UK Hamfest, and I'm pleased to announce that we will have some orange shirts there, thankfully. So there will be some of your ICQ podcast presenters there at the show if you'll be attending there at the Newark Showgrounds on Friday the 14th and 15th of October. Please come along and say hello and let us know what you're getting on in the hobby, etc. And it'll be a pleasure to meet anybody that's there in the meantime. And hopefully, Dad, you have your orange shirt pressed and ready to go and looking lovely and sparkly for people to be able to see you.
Mrs. B keeps my orange shirts pristine and ready to go, mate. And I know that some people think that's a sexist statement, but it's true. And she's got her orange shirts ready, and we got the jackets, so we'll be there early on Friday morning to set up, and then please come and see us. But I did say earlier in the podcast, Mrs. B is not an amateur. She will very much wind you up if you try and talk amateur to her. And she's not ignorant. She knows a lot more than she lets on about radio. So don't bait her. You will lose. Isn't that correct, Colin?
Yeah, but I disagree with you. She's in no way an amateur. She's very professional at managing you and looking after you and making sure that you're there for her to make cups of tea and find all sorts of treats for her. So in fairness, no, she's a highly qualified professional, in fairness. So there you go. So I say we'll be there at New York there for those 2 days, 14th and 15th of October. As I say, there'll be a collection of your ICQ podcast presenters there looking splendid in orange, and you feel free to come along and say hi to us, and it'd be great to see you from there. Right, well, this episode we had a very kind donor, Jeffrey Wilson, VK2 Julia Echo Foxtrot, and he set up one of our monthly subscription donations to the ICQ podcast. These subscription donations are very valuable in helping us pay our way and, as I say, keep our bills ticking over in everything we do, from podcast to website to newsletters to the digital group, etc. They are, as I say, very, very important in, as I say, paying our services that we need to do all those things for you. So we always ask you if you've found some benefit from today's show or from things like the digital group or the website, etc. Best thing to do is pop along to icqpodcast.com/donate. And then what we ask you to do is turn that into a monetary value, let's say from all the value you received. Either select one of the options we present you or choose one of your own and say pop that our way, and we would greatly appreciate your support. So thanks again to Jeff and all our monthly subscription donors for their support for helping us fund this episode. We, of course, would like to also thank Dan, Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, Karen, Kilo Delta 2 Golf Uniform Tango, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, Ed, DD5 Lima Papa, and Leslie, Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, for taking part in this episode's News Roundtable. Right, well, I think that just about touches base with everything for this episode. And as I say, Dad, I mentioned before, I say you have a job given to you by a highly skilled professional to make tea, find chocolate biscuits and treats, and deliver them to Mrs. B and look after her for me. So I say we better let you head off and do that very important task.
I will, because local management will, give me a written warning if I don't. Okay then, Colin, no problems. We'll catch you later. 73 all.
73's all, and hope to catch you at UK Hamfest. 73's.